Welcome, everyone. This election season, TNP's Ministry of Radio is sponsoring a series of voice chat and text-based town halls for each candidate. We hope this event is informative, and we encourage you to participate by posting questions in the Agora chat. Now let's get started. Welcome to the show, Prydania.
Happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
I'd like to dive straight into things. First and foremost, can you give us a brief history of your time in the North Pacific, including each of the positions you formerly held in our regional government and in the roleplay community?
Well, let's see. I have I popped up in TNP back in 2017. I was briefly here in 2015 as a representative of the Taisha 2 government. But, that really wasn't a stint that led to anything. I came in 2017 because I was, quite frankly, looking to RP. And Taisha 2, which had been my longtime home in nation states, quite frankly had withered and died in 2017. And it was a combination of that and the fact that I sort of left on less than amicable terms with a few people who I helped found Taisha 2 with, that kind of made going back to RP there and trying to even restart it kind of a bad process in my mind. It was not really something I wanted to do. But I knew that TNP had a very thriving RP scene, in part because of the work of Mad Jack. And I figured that would be a good place to just see if that would be a place where I could RP. And so I came here in the summer of 2017, got right into it. I've had a great time, as a lot of people would probably know. And by early 2018, I was an RP mod. And by late 2019, I had taken over as a lead RP mod, which is a position I still hold to this day. So that's the RP side of things. In terms of regional government, my first stint in TNP's regional government was actually nothing really to write home about. Syl Dorset was the Minister of WA Affairs at the time that I joined TNP. And me coming back to TNP to RP kind of meant that I could not help myself, and I felt the need to inject my 2 cents into a few WA debates on the nation states forums. Syl saw this and recruited me to the WA staff, which, I really didn't do much on, but it was, if nothing else, a good learning experience. I left the WA staff because it really wasn't something I wanted to pursue. My next position in government was Deputy Speaker for Wondrous, which, I thought I did pretty well for myself in that term. The speaker's position is something that I think is pretty straightforward. You just have to keep the RA running, and I think that we did that pretty damn well. And that was also a great learning tool because I got to understand how the speaker's office works, which I don't think is ever a bad thing. I think it's great if you have a working knowledge of how the government functions. After that, MJ stepped down as Minister of Culture with 1 week left in Ghost's last term, and I was his deputy. And under MJ, as Deputy Minister of Culture, I did things like oversee the TNP Renaissance Fair, and a number of TNP Ministry of Culture RP seminars in the university. But when MJ stepped down for personal reasons, following the end of Ghost's term, I took over for a week as Minister of Culture. And then Fiji, you kind of followed up on Ghost, and, you asked me to stay on, and I did. And after you, we had McMasterdonia's 2 terms. And I've been serving as Minister of Culture under him for those as well. So that's definitely been my most impactful position, I think, in the TNP government. I've been Minister of Culture now for going on a year. It's going to be a year very soon, so most certainly that.
Right. Why did you decide to run for the delegacy?
Oh, it's funny. one of the things that... So I've kind of had 2 periods of nation-states burnout. And the first was circa 2011, following a stint where I was actually vice delegate of Taijutsu. And things got really kind of chippy and nasty in the regional gameplay politics there. And then again, when I left Taijutsu for good, things got really personal with a number of people who I respected and still respect, to be perfectly honest. Some personal feelings got soured, but, for all that they did for that region, I really can't say too many negative things, but still, it got a bit ugly. So when I came to TNP, I kind of had this gun-shy attitude towards gameplay, specifically politics and the government. I didn't want to get involved because, in my experience, it had been kind of a nasty situation. And I kind of resisted that for a long time. I remember people were as early as 2018, which was only a few months after I had come here. People were asking me, it's like, oh, you should join like the culture ministry as staff. And I was like, I don't want to get involved. And then people were saying, oh, you should run for justice. That's a good stepping stone to get into the government. I'm like, but I don't want to be in the government. And
so what ultimately changed your mind?
Well, what changed my mind, honestly, was a few things. First, it was kind of the realization that a lot of the people in TNP, a good chunk of the community, I'd say a vast majority of the community, actually has collectively a good head on its shoulders. And I didn't feel like the same kind of personal petty nonsense that really drove me away from gameplay politics in Taijutsu was going to pop up again here. I didn't feel that would be a problem. And I kind of came to the realization that, maybe I have something to offer. Maybe I have ideas for the region that, are viable, that if I were to be elected, I could implement, and that they'd be a success. So that was kind of what changed my mind. I was talking with some people, and they were like, hey, it would be a cool idea if you did this. And at first I was a bit resistant, but after thinking it through and thinking of sort of the pros and cons, I figured that this was a good situation, that it made sense to do, and that I was pretty damn sure that the issues that had plagued me in gameplay experiences in the past weren't going to be a problem here.
All right, so let's dig into those ideas. Can you give us a brief summary of the core points of your campaign and what you think sets your campaign apart from the others?
I mean, I think the big thing that convinced me was the idea of community. It's something that we have collectively been trying to build on the RP side of things in TNP, and it's something that I've stepped up since becoming lead RP mod, especially with this Corona thing going around the world. I mean, it's no secret we're all kind of cooped up. Social distancing is kind of affecting everyone, and it was this realization that I had as lead RP mod, that, we've got this RP community that's pretty damn big. It's an online community. Online communities are kind of more important now than they've ever been before because of social distancing, and so I wanted to start emphasizing the RP community sense of, community. So we've been doing... we used to have very strict regulations on the RP server of who could stream video games in voice chat. We've lifted those significantly. It's still technically restricted, but all you need to do is ask me and I'll give you the role to bypass the restrictions. And we've done things like anime night. We've done things where we've streamed movies, TV shows, and it's, generally been well received. And one of the things that convinced me to run for delegate was the idea that, this general sense of community, not necessarily the same sort of stuff, but this general sense of community was something that I could bring to the delegate race, which is to say that I think that, as big as the TNPRP community is, the TNP gameplay community, not just necessarily gameplay, but the entire TNP community as a whole is that much bigger. And I believe that given the current situation in the world now, online communities such as our own have an opportunity to really soften the blow for a lot of people. A lot of us are cooped up. A lot of us, are restricted with who we can see, who we can talk to, just because of the way the world is at the moment. And I figured, you know what? It's probably a good thing if I came in and ran a campaign on the pluses of community. So, my platform is going to be focused on one, reviving the game server. We've successfully hosted events on the game server through culture, and so we know it can be done. And this is going to be easier because my vision for it isn't going to involve other regions. We don't have to coordinate with other people. It's something that we can do ourselves. So we need to revive the game server. It's one of the reasons I pushed for the game server to remain active beyond just its initial launch and the initial event we held there. I believe that even if it stays dormant, we can use it for great things. I believe that even beyond that, on the game server, we can have streaming nights where we have people who want to stream video games. We've got a very dedicated Hearts of Iron community in TNP. We have very dedicated Total War communities. We've got a few people who, make fantastic pieces of art with city skyline. Very fun, interesting stuff. And these viewing parties aren't just a means to just watch someone play a video game. It's a catalyst for communal activity. And I think that can be expanded. I think, quite frankly, movie, TV show nights, that's a great thing that the government should actively be encouraging. So that was the initial spark of, do I have something unique to offer? And I think that was it. And then, of course, as I started to seriously consider a run for the delegacy, I took those core communal aspects and made them the heart of a campaign, and then sort of built everything else on top of it.
All right, so you'd spoken a little bit about your vision for culture in that community aspect and game playing sense. But could you discuss basically your plans for all the other ministries as well?
Well, I think that a big part of my plans, and I didn't mean for this to become the situation, but I guess it's just something that happens once you take everything that you have and you just end up, writing it all down. And a phrase that I was surprised that kept popping up in my campaign as I was putting virtual pen to virtual paper was, how do I say this? Proactive engagement, which ended up sounding a lot more douchey and buzzwordy than I intended. But I mean, honestly, I think that if you break it down, it's very accurate as to what I want to do. I'm a big believer in top-down leadership. Maybe that's just my experience as a teacher. Maybe that's my experience as a grad student who was mercilessly kept on topic by my thesis advisor. But I tend to have the opinion that if you have someone in charge who's engaged, then the engagement flows downhill. So I think that that's also a great way to fight stagnation or the feelings of staleness in any of the ministries. So the first thing that I think that I want to do across all ministries is to get people who are actively excited and engaging into the top spots. And I know that seems obvious, but I think that that's easier said than done in a lot of cases.
Do you have anyone in mind for who those top people might be?
Yes. If you just give me a moment, let me pull up the list. Okay, so for defense, I initially wanted to keep Tron Storm on, but he's he's informed me that he's going to be taking a step back, which is a real shame. But I understand where he's coming from, and I'm very glad that we had him to serve for the period that he did. Other than that, I think Rom would make an excellent Minister of Defense. I see Gladio here. I think he'd be amazing. Just people who are excited for the NPA and who have experience. Radio, I think Dreadton has done a fantastic job. I think you have done as well, Fiji, but I sort of know that you're not there are issues prior commitments that might not make it viable, but again, I'd love to have you. And Dreadton as well, I think, has done a fantastic job with the ministry. With WA Affairs, I really like Cosmosplosion. He's got a very energetic take on it, which I think is necessary. I think it's good for keeping the ministry itself active, but more importantly, he's kind of got a very aggressive stance that I like, because he's going to be able to take our vision into the WA and fight for it tooth and nail, which is what I want out of that ministry. Home Affairs, we've got a number of really qualified people. We've got Nim, we've got Praetor, got Barbarino, people who, again, know the ministry, who have experience, who are excited to be there. Foreign Affairs, Ghost or Teloms, either, again, would be great. Again, we're talking about people who are passionate. For Culture, Syrixia, or Heighten, either of those picks would be fantastic in Culture. I've been Culture Ministry again for close to a year, and Seer has been one of my deputies for all of that. I'm pretty sure. And Heighten is a newer addition, but I've worked with both in the Culture Ministry, and I know that they'd both be excellent and engaging and very excited in the job. And then Communications, Artemis, Dino, Barbarino, Plem Bobria actually as well. Communications is sort of a harder one to fill, but again, I think we've got dedicated, excited people there. So I'd say that my plans for the ministries are just to get people who are excited about the work, who want to stress the work, and who, to be perfectly honest, this might not sound great, but I want people who are going to absolutely ride the asses of their staff and deputies, right? We need people who are going to get the people who work under them working. And
right, okay, so one quick question about that, though, because this is something that every administration has difficulty with. It's something that goes back many, many terms, and it's not something that is a new problem. I think the biggest issue that we face here isn't actually motivating people to work harder. It's making sure that we have staff in those ministries in the first place. It's a common question that I've asked the other delegate candidates, but I'm going to ask you as well, that, several executive ministries that we have suffer from that high turnover or shortage of staff. How would you work with those ministers to build up that core of staff before, trying to motivate them more? What would you do to boost recruitment and training of new staff members?
So my own experiences, like I said, I had no interest in government. I just sort of got involved in the game as I, in the areas that I liked. I liked RPing. I got recruited into Culture. I had an interest in speaking out in the WA. I got recruited into the WA staff. And I think that just from my own experiences, that's what we need, recruitment. I had no interest in joining government. People knocked on my virtual door and gave me the hard sales pitch. And, it worked.
We need recruitment, but how would you go about doing it? Is it, home affairs lists? Is it personalized telegrams? How would you go about bringing people on board? Because that's something that we've had.
It's home affairs lists, certainly. Personalized telegrams, absolutely. and we need dedicated game side advocates. We need to turn them into basically a mini army that goes around essentially knocking on people's doors and saying, hey, it's been noticed that you like doing this. Have you considered this? And it's going to annoy some people. I mean, that's true. But at the end of the day, it's all about driving traffic, and it's all about hard numbers. And if you do it to enough people, eventually you're going to get enough people. The problem, as you said, Fiji, is there is a high turnover, and sometimes ministries have trouble filling staffs. And that is entirely 100% a personnel problem. The problem is solved by getting more people in the door. And you only get people in the door by showing them where the door is. So we need to have... so what I would do is I would encourage ministers and their deputies to be as aggressive as possible in pursuing newer players who, it seems would be good fits in their ministries. I would tell game side advocates to be as aggressive as possible in directing people towards those ministries.
All right, and you also mentioned basically trying to motivate people to work harder in the ministries. What if they don't have entry-level tasks that they can work on? How would you increase the ability of our ministers to train new staff members? What programs do you think we need in order to make that process more efficient?
I think that's where mentoring comes in, because look, make work, I think, is never necessarily the answer. The job is what the job is, and sometimes, for whatever reason, a particular ministry is not primed to have entry-level work that new people can work on, and it's unfortunate, and it does hinder things. But again, the job is what it is. I think that the mentor program sidesteps this problem very nicely, because the mentor program essentially sets it up where a new player doesn't need entry-level work to get involved. They shadow someone with more experience in doing work that is perhaps a bit above, entry-level stuff. And the good news is that in that situation, they don't even necessarily have to get their hands dirty. They just need to witness it. They need to learn the ropes. That was one of the great things about my term as deputy speaker, which was a very good top-down approach by Wondrous. Wondrous, taught me how the speaker's office worked, and then I had staff under myself that then I showed the ropes to. And often, what Wondrous would do with me and what I would do with staff who, was assigned to me is, it wouldn't even necessarily be a case of the person who was learning actually doing the work. It was a matter of the person who was learning watching and studying and taking in the work that was being done. And then you do that a few times, and then the next time it comes up, you go, okay, now you try. And after a few, go-arounds in the passenger seat, they should have a good idea of what to do, if only with training wheels on. So I think that we need to emphasize mentorship, because mentorship allows new players to get involved with the workings of ministries without actually relying on busy work that may not necessarily be used. Now, sometimes entry-level work does exist in ministries, and it's great when it does. But I'm just saying, I think mentorship is a great way to get around the situation when certain when that sort of work just isn't available or just isn't needed.
Yeah, I totally agree. The thing about that is that you actually end up facing like a weird catch-22, because when I was delegate, I tried to increase our mentorship program as well, and found that we just didn't have enough home affairs staff to mentor people to get more home affairs staff and other ministry staff. So it ends up being a sort of a case where you have to ask your ministers to take up that role themselves, and you yourself as delegate sort of have to get involved too. So on that note, I would like to ask what your leadership style is like. So in other words, to what extent would you directly impact activity within each ministry to make sure that your campaign goals are met?
I think it's finding a balancing act, and I think I'm very good at that. You see this. This is something that I've got a lot of real life experience with, which is that when a task is handed out, you need people to feel like they have the freedom to complete the task however you like. I think that's especially true in a situation like this. I have made no bones about it. I was very upfront in my campaign thread that one of my weaknesses is that I am very new to a lot of this stuff. And I believe that in terms of me learning, most certainly a big thing is going to be getting experienced people on, into these ministries, people who I can trust. And a big part of that trust is saying, look, I don't know as much about this stuff as you do. I'm going to learn by working with you, but at the same time, I trust you to fulfill these goals in the best way that you know how in this ministry. And so most certainly you don't want to be a helicopter papa and constantly be buzzing people. You want people who you trust to fill these roles, to do their job as they see fit. That's why you put them in the role. At the same time, you don't want to be too aloof, because that's how, a lot of bad things can happen. That's how apathy can happen if people, realize that the guy in charge isn't actually, keeping on top at a reasonable pace. They slack off, or you have people who go off script, or people who, because they lack direction, just start doing their own thing. That's not good either. So I mean, my leadership style is pretty much, I'm going to give you a job to do. I expect you to do the job as you see fit. But I am going to be coming around regularly to go, so how's it going? What's your progress? And is there anything I can do to help further that progress if there's a bit of a fall behind?
Right, so at this point in the interview, I'm going to switch over to asking you primarily audience-based questions. So it might become a little less structured, but try to keep your answers brief, but also thorough. I don't know if you can manage that balance, don't worry about it. So first we're going to start off from a question from Maul. He's asking, in your campaign thread, you said that you'd be guided by the North Pacific's values in determining how you vote. In the context of the General Assembly, what are those values? And furthermore, can you clarify your opinion of Wall?
I think Wall's great. I think Wall is a great tool. I've gone over my opinion on that organization in my thread. I think that we should be more proactive within it. I think we need to make our voice heard within it, but I think Wall is fantastic. And I think that we have great allies in Wall. In terms of how I would vote, I mean, it's pretty simple, honestly. TNP, we are a democracy. We are as close to direct democracy as is possible given our size. So, I'm never going to rebel or go rogue against the popular vote in the WA threads. But people, whatever the regional consensus is on any one proposal, be it the GA or the SC, I will vote the way that the region shakes up on any one issue. That's my job. That's why that's part of my job if elected delegate. So I have no plans to twirl my mustache evilly and start, doing whatever the hell I want.
All right, the next question we have comes from Dredton. He wants some clarification on your earlier comment about streaming TV shows, and he's worried about terms of service and relay legal violations such as copyright. Just trying to get your view on that. Is that something that you wanted like on NBS, or just something that the Culture Ministry would do, and how would you make sure that complies with regulations?
I don't think that's an NBS position, honestly. I think the NBS has the NBS currently is tasked with a lot, and if you read through my my campaign thread, I'm asking a lot of the NBS. And that's going to continue. So I definitely don't want to pile on stuff like this onto whoever ends up being the radio minister under me. Again, I would really love it if Dredgen stayed on, but that's up to him. I would so yeah, no, that wouldn't be an NBS thing. That would be a culture thing in all likelihood. That would be a culture directed thing. In terms of service, all I can say is that the sort of thing that I'm advocating for, the sort of thing that I'm putting forward as a potential plan, is stuff that is happening not just in TNP affiliated discords, but is happening in discords across the world. This is the sort of Discord itself increased its streaming limits per voice chat from 10 to 50 people when the COVID outbreak hit, really started to ramp up. And we're not the only ones who are talking about doing this or doing this. It's happening all over. In terms of to make sure everything's on the up and up, I know as an example that when I host a streaming event in the RP server, as an example, it's always through programs that are legal. It's through programs that I personally am paying a subscription for. So I don't think there's much to worry about on that point. Yeah, as an example, we streamed a few episodes of The Office, and I streamed that through my own Netflix account that is legally, bought and paid for. So I don't see too much of an issue there.
All right, moving on to the next question. Can you discuss your plans for the North Pacific's university if elected?
I think that the university, and I've got a very tilted view in this because my first full term as culture minister kind of got off to a rocky start because out of nowhere we had this issue of the university. And so my position on the university is very much framed in that context. All I want out of the university is academic freedom. I feel that it should be open to any number of topics. They don't preferably not even nation states topics. Obviously, there's a room for nation states topics in the university, but I think the university has the potential to be a resource for a lot of other aspects. We've got a lot of bright people here who are educated in a number of very interesting fields, and I think that we should encourage them to post. I'm not asking them to get on university staff. I'm not asking them to become regular lecturers, but I think that if someone, has a wealth of knowledge on a given topic, and it's something that could be shared and could be put out there for people to read and educate themselves on, then I think that's a good thing. So honestly, my university position is very laissez-faire. I think we need someone in charge of it who, like everything else, is excited about it and is willing to keep it active. But beyond that, I feel the university should be a place where ideas are freely kind of discussed and put forward and all that good sounding stuff.
All right. That's a pretty good answer. So the next question comes from Owen Stacy. He's interested in getting back to the mentorship discussion that we had earlier. He's wondering, how would the mentor idea work with ministries like Foreign Affairs, where it's going to be a lot harder to have people shadow others?
I think that in Foreign Affairs, obviously this is a very case-by-case basis. In Foreign Affairs, where that sort of thing is harder, there will have to be adjustments. Thankfully, with Foreign Affairs, it's one of those ministries that I think naturally sort of draws new people into. You look at the wealth of applicants that we get for the ministries, and I think Foreign Affairs, routinely does pretty well for itself in terms of attracting people, which is which is good because the mentor position, is all about getting people engaged in the ministry. If we have a steady flow of recruits into the ministry, then it becomes less of a vital issue to get them engaged. Again, this is basic community management stuff and basic traffic flow stuff when it comes to online communities and these sorts of things. So I think that in the foreign affairs ministry, the influx of people that we see into that means that we don't necessarily have to have people shadowing. I think that in the foreign affairs ministry, a mentor position honestly can be as simple as busy work. I know I kind of said I don't want a make work program for ministries, but I think that in the foreign affairs ministry, again, on a case-by-case basis, it is something that could function. Again, it could be as simple as simply ambassadors having someone who they pass information off to and be like, hey, I need to have a report put out on these happenings. I don't have time for whatever reason. Here are the bullet points. You make it sound pretty.
All right, next question comes from Maul. He's wondering if you believe that the North Pacific should continue its policy of griefing fascist nations whenever and wherever they are found.
Yes, bash the fash.
Can you explain why?
I think fascism runs counter to a lot of it runs counter to all of the values that we stand for in TNP. And I believe that, quite frankly, we need to have a zero tolerance policy on it. I mean, a fascist region attempted to coup us just last term. Now, granted, it was carried out with all the subtlety of a drunk man in a china shop, but it still happened. I would say that what we need to do is, quite frankly, hound them in the WA, hound them with the NPA, and just kind of honestly never let up. They, as a collection of regions, they are intrinsically opposed to every value that TNP holds dear, and we shouldn't tolerate them. I'd say that Now, of course, there is the argument where it's like, oh, if this is a small fascist region, who the hell cares? And that's fair, honestly. There's something to be said for smart allocation of resources. But I think that what we've seen in the broader political arena in the world and nation states, this is perhaps amplified just due to the nature of people who are drawn to nation states, is that fascist regions are becoming increasingly more aggressive and increasingly more upfront in willing to promote themselves, their ideology, and their platform. And so I think on that basis alone, we should most certainly harass them at every opportunity. Beyond that, again, as I said in my campaign thread, when GBM asked me to sort of just briefly go over my nation states history, I mentioned I've been in nation states in one form or another since 2006. I very much remember when neo-Nazi groups used this game to actually recruit young people into real-life fascist movements. So this isn't even a case of, someone just wants to be, an edgy LARPer on the internet, like, why are you griefing them? No, this is a real situation that has occurred in this game before, where fascist regions actively use this game and use the flimsy cover of It's Just RP to recruit people into actual real-life fascist movements. I mean, hell, there were fascist regions who were recruiting people for the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally where someone goddamn died. So I think most certainly we have an opportunity and the means to stomp it out when we can.
All right, thanks for that response. I think we're all appreciative of your strong stance on that issue. Next question comes from McMasterdonia. Recently, we established the Senior World Assembly Consultants. We already have senior diplomats. I wonder what ideas you have for making sure that we are giving experienced members of the executive staff the opportunity to move up in the ministry hierarchy. Do you think we need to do more to fill out these senior ranks beyond just people who have previously been a delegate or minister?
I mean, I think it's always advantageous when you can get new blood in there. People have wrongly stated that TNP tends to cycle through the same people through various positions. I think this election cycle, not just the delegate race, but kind of across all positions, is indicative that that's a lie, or at least an ill-informed opinion. But there are times where it does seem like, this person's going to run and we know them, and yeah, let's give them the position. Or, a new delegate is elected and the cabinet from the previous delegate, has a lot of carryover just with some positions changed. I think that a lot of that comes down to motivation. A lot of people don't feel like newer blood is as engaged, which is why I want to take the proactive approach that I've kind of struck out with here, where I want people to run the ministries who are excited, who can have that enthusiasm flow downhill to their deputies, to their staff. And a big part of that is upward mobility. Excitement is only step one. If you get a new recruit into a ministry excited about the work they're doing, and they put it all into what they're doing, and they're still only a staff member because the positions for upward mobility are limited, then there's a potential that they're going to become disinterested, they're going to become disheartened, that they may decide, I don't want to do this anymore. Why should I do this? So it is very much a situation where I think we need to look at how we expand upward mobility. I think we need to be careful about creating too many new positions, because bureaucracy and bureaucratic sludge is real, and we don't want to get bogged down in too many specialized rankings. But I think that we do need to encourage ministers to find ways for people to feel like they're moving up. A big thing, I think, is shuffling through deputy ministers is something that we could consider, because quite frankly, we need to encourage ministers to go, okay, you are experienced in this field, I trust you in this field, but you need to get new blood under you to train them, to ensure that, when you're eventually done, that there's someone to come after you, which is what MCM pushed me to do as culture minister. And I think it worked out well, because I've got Heighton and Seer under me, who I believe either one of them are perfectly capable of succeeding me as culture minister. They're both enthusiastic and they're both very able to do the work. And I think that, more so than anything, is going to be the key. We need to encourage people we need to encourage the drive for new people at the deputy level. I think that would be far more useful than sort of creating specialized hierarchical roles that aren't necessarily functional.
The next question comes from Garundu. You've spoken quite a bit about your community building in TNPRP, but do you have any specific ideas about how you can apply this to the broader TNP communities that exist on many other mediums, including, specifically, the regional message board?
I mean, I think this is we're actually kind of in a very interesting, in a good way, situation to really explore that. When I first got into nation states, the primary means that you had of communicating with people was either the RMB or the forum. And then as you kind of got to know your region mates, it didn't matter if you were in gameplay or RP, as you got to know the people that you worked with, that you did stuff with, maybe you got to know them enough that you shared your AOL instant message account, or your Yahoo instant message account, or your MSN instant message account, which makes me feel old because that was social media back in 2006 when I was in high school. But that's what it was. And then we also had IRC, of course, but IRC, for any of you who actually remember it, is very limited as well. I think that Discord and programs like Discord offer us a lot of opportunity to carry that sense of community into places like the RMB. If I may talk a bit about RMB to sort of explain RMB RP to explain that. The current RMB roleplay communities that we have are not the first RP communities to exist on the RMB. People have been trying to RP on TNP's RMB since TNP was a thing, and it's almost always died. And the reason that it's died is because TNP is a feeder, and we are the largest feeder, which means that the flow of information on the RMB goes by at a huge pace. And what would always happen is that people who tried to RP on the RMB and TNP in the past would get frustrated because it was hard to keep track of RP posts through the flood of new people posting on the RMB. And it was hard to get everyone on the same page because maybe you and a group of people, had dedicated RPs on the RMB going, but then we're getting hundreds of new people a day. And some of them just want to post RP and they have no regard for what you're doing. So they start doing their own thing, and different communities, different sub RP communities, would get into conflict, and it just never worked out. It was almost impossible to work out, which is why for the longest time it was TNP policy to direct all RMB RPers to the forum RP. But Discord has changed the game, and I see that as an RP mod. I am able to see that Discord allows these various RMB RPers a place outside of the RMB to gather, to plan RPs out, to give each other links to relevant RP posts, and to foster a sense of community where you're not just a name on the RMB that gets buried by 50 new messages every 2 minutes. And that has been fantastic for maintaining a RMB RP community in TNP. Without Discord, Strange Rail wouldn't exist. It just wouldn't. The way that the RMB functions would make it impossible. But Discord has not made it possible, it's made it thriving. And so I think Discord is really the great tool that we have here. Doesn't matter if it's a forum RP community or an RMB RP community or a forum gameplay community or an RMB gameplay community. It doesn't matter. We are all part of one TNP community, and Discord, I think, is the great middle ground for that. And I think that we can come here and we can foster that sense of community through Discord that reaches both the forums and the RMB.
All right, thank you for your very extensive answer to that question. The next one comes from Sear. As a role player, how do you plan to bridge the perceived gap between the two primary communities in TNP, roleplay and gameplay or regional government? And moreover, how will you address accusations of forum favoritism?
Honestly, forum favoritism's not a thing. I don't want to waste too much time on that. Forum versus RMB is stuff that we dealt with, literally a year and a half ago. It was a lot of drama over what ended up being a lot of nothingness. It was people talking past each other. It was miscommunication. I think in a lot of cases we hashed it out, and you really don't even see that divide. Obviously, there are RMBers and there are forum users, but I think a lot of that antagonism just simply isn't there anymore, and I'm not really interested in dwelling on what I think to be something that's trending in a positive direction. In terms of the gameplay versus RP dynamic, look, it's very simple. Some RPers are interested in gameplay, most aren't. Some game players are interested in RP, most aren't. And as I said in my thread, I'm not interested in forcing people to do things that they're not engaged in, that they don't enjoy. So I think the best way to bridge the gameplay RP gap is through the NBS. I think that NBS shows that focus on highlighting individual game players will do a lot to inform the RP community on who the prolific game players are. And I think NBS shows that focus on RPers will do a lot to inform game players who the prolific RPers are. And it will expose each section to sort of the inner workings of the other. Again, I'm not looking to force RPers who don't like gameplay to gameplay, and I'm not looking to force game players who don't like RPing to RP. But I think something like that, just to give each side a sense of what the other's up to, would be a great idea.
You talked about fighting and taking a tough stance on issues such as WA affairs. How do you reconcile this with the need for diplomacy and compromise?
I think that there's nothing wrong with saying compromise when necessary and being aggressive when it's called for that too. I think that in certain issues, there is no need to compromise. You look at what just happened in the WA, right? In terms of, what was it, the 5th or 6th attempt to repeal reproductive freedoms, right? All right, and once again, we saw that the attempt to repeal reproductive freedoms lost by a margin of 8-2. Look, I'm not trying to make a stance one way or another on the pro-life or pro-choice thing. I'm really not interested in igniting that debate. But I think that it is a clear example of when compromise isn't needed. If you hold all of the cards, then you don't necessarily, or at least most of the cards, then you don't necessarily need to come to the table. And again, not to get into the abortion debate, but TNP has consistently voted the same way on repeal attempts on reproductive freedoms. So I look at that. We have a consistent track record on this issue. We have consistently made our values on this issue known. We have consistently voted the same way on this issue. So in a case like that, where we have a large delegate count, a large endorsement count, where we have very well stated opinions on the matter, where we have very well stated values on the matter, why should we attempt to compromise with the other side? I see no need for it.
All right, next question goes to Maul. As a role player, what role did the candidate play in the 2013 coup of TSP? For clarity, he's referring to the Milograd coup.
2013, I honestly can't speak to that. That was in a period where I wasn't as involved in nation states as I am today. So I wish I could give more info on that, but I can't. So
All right, that's fine. We'll skip on to the next question then. Next one goes to Dredton. Do you think the North Pacific Army should continue its operations to block WA proposals?
Yes, I do. I've outlined it in the thread that it would be aggressively used to attack WA proposals from fascist regions, and it would remain a tool on the table for other proposals, although anything that wasn't directly targeting fascists would be a very delicate discussion that would happen between myself, the WA minister, the WA minister's deputies, and NPA leadership. So yeah, absolutely, when it comes to fascist regions, fascist proposals, anything else, it would be a very case-by-case basis that would only be considered after careful consideration.
Again, regarding fascists, how do we strike a balance between shutting them down and avoiding giving them too much attention, which many believe is their goal?
I don't particularly find the attention argument to be compelling, especially not in the present situation. Maybe 5 years ago, I would understand that you don't want to give these, crazy niche individuals too much limelight, and who cares? They're not large enough to impact anything anyway. But since then, we have seen an increase in boldness from fascists in the real world, and that's spilled into nation states. And I think that we need to unapologetically be opposed to those sorts of ideologies and those sorts of groups. Again.
All right. I think that's pretty comprehensive. Vathia asks, as someone who is primarily a role player, and given that you're currently lead roleplay moderator, hi Boz, how will your delegacy benefit the Eras and RMB RP communities as a whole?
Like I said, I want to continue to promote RP through cultural events akin to what we did with the World Cup in 2019. That the World Cup probably won't return for 2020, but that's not because we don't think we can do it. It's just that we've got other ideas. And again, the World Cup isn't an annual thing, so why should the TNP World Cup be an annual thing? But we're going to promote various. But we do have plans to promote things such as the World Cup in both Eris and Strange Reel. We have, and of course, there are plans to promote the RP communities through the NBS, and of course, the Roleplay Reel through Culture and Communications. So there most certainly are plans to make sure that the government is promoting RP. At the same time, I'm not going to be particularly focused on that above all else. I have a reputation as an RPer, which is well earned, but it's not like I'm going to be dedicated to promoting RP above all else. I've got plans to promote RP. I've also got plans to do a hell of a lot of other things in other ministries. So it's going to be something that's certainly on the list to get done. And I've explained it in depth on a number of occasions what I plan to do in that regard.
Could you just give us like a really quick, I mean, we only have like a minute left. Could you just give us like a really quick rundown of what those ambitions are for RP promotion?
Roleplay Reel, NBS shows, events akin to the World Cup that we did last year, and as always, we will be open to promoting RP with our treated allies who we promote RP with, Greater Dionystad being probably the biggest one, but there are other regions that we've done RP work with in the past as well, and we would continue to work with LIM on interregional RP events. So,
perfect. Thanks. All right, at this point, I think we want to wrap things up. Thank you so much for everyone who has participated by asking questions, and thank you, Prydania, for coming, especially on such short notice.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
All right, have a good day. And for everybody else in the chat right now, you may want to stick around because in just half an hour, we're going to be hosting Artemis's Vice Delegate Town Hall. So thank you so much for your time. Hope to see you there.